So to review, we talked about energy and how the sun is the ultimate source of energy for living organisms. We talked about that the eggs provide energy for different organisms, that the eagle is using energy to fly, the turtle uses energy to move, the fish uses energy to move, and the leaves are producing energy through photosynthesis. This was our brainstorm on this unit, which is our energy unit. We then talked about ATP. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. The name tells you what it's made up of. It's made up of an adenosine molecule, which is this A, made up of a sugar, which is this, and it's made up of 3 phosphate molecules, which are these 3 P's. When it's ATP, it's storing energy. When you do work, any of your muscle cells do work, or you do active transport, you end up releasing a phosphate right here. When you release a phosphate, your ATP becomes ADP. ADP is adenosine diphosphate, which means that it has only 2 phosphate molecules. So this is like an uncharged battery. ATP is like a charged battery. In this unit, we're going to learn how the body makes ATP, how we make ATP through a process called cellular respiration, and how we use ATP in processes like photosynthesis. ATP, remember, is how that molecule that cells use for energy, because cells don't use food. So we use ATP when we move our muscles, when we do things in our body that we're unaware of, such as breathing, regulating body temperature, and we use it for active transport. We use it when we have a protein pump, which was a type of active transport. We use it for endocytosis. Every activity that your body does requires ATP to work. In the process of photosynthesis, we're going to be looking at plants. So one structure that's important for plants are the leaves. The leaves of the plants are important because they collect sunlight. We'll also need to think about the stems. The stems hold the leaf and also deliver water and nutrients to a plant. When we think about leaves, there's 2 types of leaves from 2 different types of plants. We can have a monocot. Notice that a monocot, the veins are parallel. This would be like grasses. We can also have a dicot. Notice that in a dicot, the veins branch. This is what you would see in many trees, such as an oak tree. If we take a closer look at a plant, we can point out a couple important features of the layers of a plant's leaf. The surface of the plant's leaf has a cuticle. The cuticle is a waxy coating that prevents water loss. We then have the upper epidermis, which is the layer right underneath the cuticle. Followed by that, we have this parenchyme, which is a column-shaped group of cells. And underneath that, we have the spongy layer. Notice the spongy layer is circular, and there's spaces between the cells. And those spaces between the cells allow for gas exchange. We also have these stomata, and the stomata are openings in the leaf that allow for gas exchange. We'll talk more about that in the next slide. And there's two important types of tissue. There's xylem, and the xylem is a tissue that delivers water. And then we have the phloem, which is a tissue that delivers nutrients like sugar. Here's a closer look at two special adaptations that plants have. This right here is a closer look at the stomata. The stomata is made up of these white guard cells. The guard cells look like lips, and they can open and close based on whether the plant is in a situation where it wants to prevent water loss or where it wants to be sure to take in gases. So the stomata take in carbon dioxide from the outside and release oxygen from the inside. The stomata can also lose water in a process called transpiration. So, if the outside environment is very hot, a plant can lose water through the stomata if the stomata are open. This is the process of osmosis because water is going to move from a high concentration to a low concentration. So if it's very hot, the plant's going to have more water than the outside. So the water will move from the plant to the outside. But to prevent transpiration, a leaf will close its stomata to prevent water loss, to prevent transpiration from happening. The plants also have these trichomes, and trichomes are tiny hairs that are off of the root. So if the plant has lots of tiny hairs off of the roots, it can allow for more water absorption. More water absorption because it's going to increase the surface area of the root. So these are two features you should know about for the plants, that they have guard cells, which are part of the stomata, and that they have these trichomes, which increase the surface area and allow for more water absorption. You should understand the parts of the chloroplast. Chloroplast has this outer membrane and the inner membrane. We'll talk more about why this is so, but it does provide evidence that the chloroplast was once a prokaryotic organism, or a bacteria cell. The theory of endosymbiosis explains this, but it's important for now just to remember that a plant cell with this chloroplast has both an outer and inner membrane. It has thylakoids. The thylakoids are these individual stacks. So each of these stacks, which sometimes are referred to as pancakes, is called a thylakoid. This is where the light reaction happens. And the thylakoid also has the stroma. And the stroma is the space around the thylakoids. And this is where the Calvin cycle happens, which is the second step of photosynthesis. A granum just refers to a stack of thylakoids. If we look at the light reaction, we can go through the steps of the light reaction. The steps of the light reaction are, first, light hits a leaf. Then, chlorophyll, which is a plant pigment, absorbs the light. This causes water to split. And water splits into a hydrogen ion, which is positive, an electron, which is negative, and oxygen. Oxygen is going to leave through the stomata. Meanwhile, the hydrogens are going to be on one side of the thylakoid membrane, and the electrons are going to be on the other side of the membrane. This right here is called the electron transport chain. So since hydrogen and the electrons want to be near each other, but they can't, that generates energy. At the end of the electron transport chain, the hydrogen combines with NADP to make NADPH, which is an energy carrier like ATP. So this is made at the end of the electron transport chain. Also, at the end of the electron transport chain, the electron energy from the electrons is used to turn ADP into ATP. Both of these molecules are going to be important because they're required in the Calvin cycle. So, in the light reaction, light hits the leaf, step 1. Then, chlorophyll, the plant that is the pigment, absorbs the light. This causes water to be split. Water gets split into hydrogen, oxygen, and electrons. The oxygen is going to leave through the stomata. Meanwhile, the hydrogen and the electrons get passed down the electron transport chain. So hydrogen and electrons are going to get passed down the electron transport chain. At the end of the electron transport chain, NADP is going to make NADPH. Also at the end of the electron transport chain, ADP is going to be turned into ATP. Both NADPH and ATP are used in the Calvin cycle. In step 2, to the Calvin cycle, we're going to take CO2, which we haven't used yet, and we're going to use our ATP and our NADPH, and we're going to make our glucose. If you remember, glucose is made up of 6 carbons. We know that because of the formula C6H12O6. And if we put 6 carbons in, each of the carbon molecules comes from one of the CO2 molecules. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this carbon cycle spins 6 times to produce 1 molecule of glucose. The ATP releases its energy to make the sugar and becomes ADP. NADPH releases its energy to become NADP. Then the ADP and the NADP go back to the light reaction so that they can be recharged. This reaction here is all taking place in the stroma, and at the end of the cycle you can have your sugar molecule. We can summarize the process in a nice table. So if we summarize the process, we can say the step, where it happens, what it requires, and what it produces. So if we look at this in a chart, it might be easier to summarize. Step 1 is the light reaction. The light reaction happens in the thylakoid membrane. The light reaction requires light, water, and your uncharged batteries, ADP and NADP. The light reaction then produces your oxygen, which is going to leave through the stomata, and ATP and NADPH. Both of these are going to get used in the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle is the second step. The Calvin cycle takes place in the stroma, which is the space in between the thylakoids, and the Calvin cycle is going to use carbon dioxide, ATP, and NADPH. At the end of the Calvin cycle, you're going to produce your glucose, and your ATP becomes ADP, which is because it's given up its energy, and your NADPH becomes NADP, and those will go to the light reaction so that they can be recharged. So this, again, is a summary of the process of photosynthesis. The equation for photosynthesis that you should know is 6 molecules of water plus 6 carbon dioxide plus light is going to make 6 oxygen molecules plus glucose, C6H12O6. I hope this explanation has been helpful.